Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to be starting in just a few minutes. Thanks for coming early. Hi again, good afternoon, everyone. The time is 6:59. We are going to be starting in just a minute. In the meantime, if you can take the time to answer the poll question, we're just waiting for a few more people to join, and we're going to be starting in just a minute. All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Sergey, and I will be the host of your seminar this afternoon, this evening. If you have any questions throughout this seminar, there's a Q&A box, so please put your questions in a Q&A box, and we'll be sure to address these questions all throughout the seminar. Again, thank you for voting here in this little poll. I really want to congratulate you on being here this evening and taking the time to invest some time into learning something really valuable for your studies. And I want to make sure that you walk away from this seminar retaining this knowledge in your mind. So here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to ask you to get a little outside of your comfort zone. Now, how we're going to do this is I'm going to give you a few challenges all throughout this class, all throughout the seminar tonight. They will all be related to the verbal section of the GMAT. So we're going to be doing a few verbal questions all throughout this evening. And they might take you a little outside of a comfort zone, but don't worry, this is a learning process. The only way for you to learn is to get slightly uncomfortable. Now, if you ever find yourself too uncomfortable, you might be in what's called a panic zone, in which case, don't look for the door. Instead, put a question in a chat box, and my colleague Tatiana, who is here moderating the seminar with me, is going to address these questions, and I'm going to certainly address these questions as well at the end of the seminar. So, how are we going to do this? Well, let's begin by looking at a real GMAT question. This is going to be a question from the verbal reasoning section that is a critical reasoning question. Here's an example of this question. I'm going to give you a few seconds, probably about 30 seconds or so, to read this question, try to make sense of it, try to see if you can actually answer it, and then I'm going to show you the answer choices. All right, well, I'd like to ask you a question. Maybe since I haven't shown you the answer choices yet, how many times did you read this passage? Just please put your answer in the chat box. I'm just curious if you read it once or maybe more than once. All right, yeah, perfect. Thanks for being honest. Well, twice or three times. And let me ask you a question. After reading this 2 or 3 times, certainly more than once, can you honestly say that you really understand what is going on here in this passage? Okay, well, again, thanks for being honest. Now, again, this is a multiple choice exam. So maybe once I show you the answer choices, things are going to be a lot more clear. So let me show you the answer choices now. So if you think you know what the answer is, just please put your answer in this poll box, and then we'll see if how many people get this right. All right, just a couple more seconds. Please choose an answer. All right, now, as you could see by the majority vote, the answer is A. Right, I hope this is how it would work on the GMAT, and the most popular answer was A, and the least popular answer was B, and then we had a pretty equal distribution of C, D, and E. So given that whichever answer is, not more than a quarter of the people got this right, this seems like a difficult question. So maybe let's go back to this question and take a look at it again. Now, this is a question that is an argument, because all critical reasoning questions involve argument. And the argument is made by a person whose profession is an ethicist. Now, in case you don't know who's an ethicist, that is a philosopher who studies ethics. So this person is trying to make some sort of an argument, and the argument is about ethics. It's about that subject matter. So let me ask you a question. How much of the ethics do you need to know in order to get into a business school? Do you have to be an expert in ethics? What do you think? Just please put it in the chat box, yes or no. Oh, perfect. Stacy is saying no. Well, I think you have to be ethical, and that's important, but you don't have to be an expert on ethics. It absolutely, the subject matter here is not that important. It's all about your ability to analyze the structure of this passage and really think of what is going to be necessary for me to answer this question. Now, the question, by the way, said that the statement in boldface plays which of the following roles? You would probably have noticed by now that a part of this argument in the middle was bolded, and the question was about this bolded part. Now, in order for us to understand why is this bolded part there, believe it or not, it might not be as important to understand what this person was trying to say. Because if you're really trying to dig deep into this subject of ethics, you might easily get lost. And that's really what the GMAT is hoping you're going to get. Now, we as humans, when we read something that we are uncomfortable with, when we read something we don't know, we tend to really try to understand it. That's just our human nature. But this is a sure way to lose a lot of time on the GMAT. Instead, here's all that you need to understand about this question. You would notice that the words that are highlighted are the simple words that we all use in our everyday language, nothing about ethics. The person begins by saying it would be a mistake to say something. So what this means is that somebody else is presenting an opinion, and the author, ethicist, is disagreeing with that opinion. We call this statement a claim of an argument. Now, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but the claim needs some sort of support in the argument. We need to provide some evidence or some backup as to why do we believe this claim. Therefore, what's going to follow this statement is going to be this support. Now, the question, notice, wasn't about that first part. It wasn't really about the claim. It was about the support for the claim that comes after the claim. And specifically, if we zoom in on these words in bold, we would notice that they begin with words for although it is true, and then there's some sort of ethics gibberish that we don't understand anyway. But what we do know, it's a support for our claim, and we also do know that the author agrees with it. He thinks it's true, or she thinks it's true, because he's saying, for although this is true, so it's as clear as it can possibly get. Well, let's see if this analysis might maybe be enough, because we focus now on breaking down the structure of the argument and on understanding how the statements connect. So let's go back to our answer choices. We have 5 answer choices. There isn't really any reason why we should start with any one. So I'd just like to start with C just because I know what's coming. So C says, it is a faulty claim. Now remember, this is not a question about the entire argument. This is a question about that part in bold. Now we already know the author thinks it's true, so it's not faulty, and it is not really a claim. So answer choice C is out. We don't even have to continue reading it. I'm curious, by the way, if everybody read all of the answer choices from the beginning till the end. It was not necessary here. Let's take a look at answer choice D. It is according to the argument, again, that bolded part, according to the argument, the commonly held opinion, that is nevertheless false. Again, false. This is not the right answer. The author thinks it's true. E, it reports an observation that the argument claims is, oh wait, false again. E is also out. So now we're down to 2 answer choices, A and B. Now let me ask you a question. When you're down to 2 answer choices, how many of them realistically do you need to read? Should we read both of them? Or maybe it would be enough to just read one of them? What do you think? Yes, one. Some of you are saying one of them would be enough. Absolutely, because now we've already been focusing on the process of elimination. We have 2 answer choices left. If we read one and it's right, we'll just pick it and move on. And if it's wrong, it has to be the other one. Well, I have a choice of A or B, and A looks like a little simpler. It's shorter, probably a little easier to understand as well. Fewer words, save some time. So let's read A. A was the most popular choice in our seminar. So A says, it is a claim for which the argument attempts to provide justification. Well, wait a second. The claim was at the beginning of the argument. The question wasn't about that part, it was about the part involved. Therefore, we can confidently eliminate answer choice A, and the only answer that's left is B. And B is definitely the right answer to this question. Now, let me ask you this question. After having gotten the right answer, can you confidently say that you understood what this person was trying to say? Like, honestly, do you now understand that ethics part of the question? No, me neither. It is not that important. That is not what the GMAT's about. It is not an ethics test. It is a test of knowing how to analyze the arguments and other things as well, knowing what's important, and doing just enough to choose the right answer under severe time pressure. And that actually brings us to a very important point about the GMAT exam. This is not going to be a test of knowing business or knowing ethics or any other subject matter. Instead, the GMAT exam measures your higher order reasoning skills. And these are, by the way, the skills that will really matter in your classroom when you do your MBA program, as well as in that workplace where you're going to go after you graduate from your MBA program. So knowledge of pretty much anything is not that important for the GMAT. However, you do need to have some basic knowledge, not an expert knowledge, and operating knowledge of some math. This is not really what we're going to focus about today. That's going to be the subject of our seminar 2 weeks from now. And you also need to be comfortable with English language. And all of this basic knowledge is really there for you to be able to demonstrate these different types of reasoning skills. Now, I call this the worst kept GMAT secret because this is something you can find in an official guide and also on MBA.com. And this is what most people miss when they prepare for the GMAT. They really try to cram a lot of knowledge, they read a lot of books, they memorize a lot of concepts, and yet they're still missing out on getting a high score because the GMAT really requires them to demonstrate these reasoning skills as opposed to the amazing knowledge of these formulas. So this was a little bit of a preview of what is going to come and how we're going to unravel what is actually really important and what are the skills that I should know and how should I prepare for demonstrating these skills on the exam. So here's what we're going to talk about today. First of all, what are some of the really important things that you should know? And also, when you're studying, there's a step that many as well as what are some of the biggest verbal traps that you shouldn't be getting into after today's class. And also, at the end of our seminar, we're also going to be talking about some of the basic verbal, some of the tips of MBA applications that are going to be really important because getting into a business school wasn't just about doing well on the GMAT. It will also be about submitting a really good application, writing your essay. So your verbal skills are also going to be really important. It's now about how do you tell your own story? How do you analyze your own arguments? Are they convincing enough? And that is why we talk about this at the same time when we talk about our verbal section. Now, let me just very briefly introduce myself. My name is Sergey. I work for AdmitMaster. I have 3 university degrees. I have a Bachelor of Physics, a Master of Mathematics, and I also do have an MBA. I have scored really well on the GMAT. I studied for about 2 weeks and I scored 750. And perhaps that is why I became a GMAT instructor, and I've been now teaching the GMAT for about 10 years. This is already my third career. I've worked in science before I got into an MBA, then I worked in business. I worked in finance for a very large corporation for about 10 years. I worked a lot with numbers, and I realized that I really love working with people, and that is why I became a GMAT instructor, and I do a lot of other work for AdmitMaster as well. Now, I love challenges that require a skill. So outside of the GMAT, which is my passion, believe it or not, I also do a few other things during the winter. I do snowboarding. In the summer, I do sailing. And now in the middle of the season, I don't really do anything. And I know we're locked in at home, and that is why that's the best time for us to focus on that third passion of mine, of course, the GMAT, because my snowboarding season was cut short and our sailing season hasn't started yet for obvious reasons. Now, I do have to tell you, even though it's really impressive that I scored 750 after 2 weeks, I work with people whom I consider much smarter than me, and I learn a lot from these people. I work with some of the GMAT instructors who've been teaching much longer than me, some of them over 20 years. So this seminar contains a lot of experience and insights from all of our instructors that contributed. And if we put together all of the experience of about 4 or 5 people that contributed to this seminar, there'll be over 70 years of teaching the GMAT. Can you imagine how much experience, how many insights can you gain after 70 years? And that's what you're going to learn today in just 2 hours. So let's get started. Let's learn some really important things about the GMAT. First of all, just in case you're only beginning to study, and I know some of you do as you've answered at the beginning of this webinar, what is the structure of the test? Well, this is a traditional format of the test. There are 4 sections, and up until 2 years ago, the exam was always taken in this order. There's an essay that you're going to need to write where you're going to analyze an argument that is similar to an argument you've just seen, but you're going to have to write a critique. You're actually going to have to type it on a computer. That is the only section of the GMAT that is not multiple choice. You're also going to do an integrated reasoning section, which is essentially a section that analyzes your ability to deal with business cases, 12 very short mini business cases, also half an hour. So this is a section, I don't know if you've already tried doing an integrated reasoning section. This is a section that certainly scares a lot of people because the time pressure is severe. You have 12 business cases and only 2.5 minutes for each case. Now you're going to have 2 minutes, 2 breaks. Each break is 8 minutes long. And then you're going to have 2 sections that contribute towards your total score. So these are the most important sections of the GMAT for that reason. There's a quant section and a verbal section. Each section is approximately an hour long, a little bit over an hour. And on the quant section, you have exactly 2 minutes per question. And on the verbal section, you're going to have a little less than 2 minutes per question, actually exactly 1 minute and 48 seconds. There's certain scores that you're going to get. Essentially, everything you're going to do on the exam is going to be measured and scored, and you are going to be receiving a series of different scores at the end of your test. Now let's dig a little bit deeper into the structure of the quant and verbal reasoning section. Then I'll talk about the order of the sections in a moment. Now, the quantitative reasoning section consists of 2 question types. First of all, there's problem solving, and secondly, there's data sufficiency. If you have not been to our math refresher class, I would encourage you to come on May 12th at the same time. We are going to be talking about these question types, and we'll talk about some of the very important math theory that you need to know for the GMAT. Now, the verbal reasoning section, which is why we're here today, consists of 3 question types: sentence correction, critical reasoning, which is what you've already seen, as well as reading comprehension. Now, both of these sections, quantitative and verbal reasoning, follow what's called the computer adaptive algorithm. Now, what does it mean, computer adaptive? You've gotten so far in life, I would imagine you know what is a computer. We're using one right now. And I would imagine you also know what is a test. So what does it mean, adaptive? Well, essentially what this means is that the test is trying to understand what is your level by giving you some easier, some medium, and some hard level questions, and is trying to understand which of these levels of questions you're going to be able to handle. It's doing so by monitoring your performance. So anytime you are making mistakes, the GMAT believes that you probably will deserve to do easier questions, and therefore will keep giving you easier questions. If you can handle questions well, the GMAT will keep giving you harder questions because it predicts that you can probably do better than how you've done so far. And that is how the GMAT is essentially understanding what your score is going to be by varying the difficulty of the questions. Now, you may have heard that the GMAT is using a secret formula to calculate your score. Well, from a more conceptual perspective, it is as simple as questions get harder or easier. But if you want to know what is that secret formula, I actually can show one to you, because this is a formula that was shared with us and a small number of test prep companies at the special invitation-only conference by the GMAT, by the organization that actually creates the test. So they invite a very small group of trusted and respected companies that have been around for a while, and they share a few insights with them, and they as well as ask some of our own input and feedback from working with our students. So if you'd like to know the formula, I'll show one to you. Here it is. Now, I know it's probably not of much help to you, but this is actually the real formula of how the GMAT scores are calculated. So without getting deep into math and calculus, let me share you what you really need to know about this formula. Well, first of all, you may have heard that some of the questions on the GMAT don't count. And that is indeed true, because for the GMAT to be able to assess your level, it needs to know for every single question, what is that level of difficulty of each question. And it's doing so by throwing in some experimental question and then assessing what is that level of difficulty by calculating how many people get that question right. So if only about 10% of people get that question right, that has to be a 90th percentile question. So that's why the experimental questions are there. There's approximately a 10% questions in the quant section, and approximately 20% of questions on the verbal section are experimental. What this also means is that if you're really invested in a question and you just have to get it right before you move on, please remember that there's a chance that the question is experimental. So don't get too bogged down into any question. You may have also heard that because of the adaptive nature of the test, the first 10 questions of the test are really important, and therefore you should be spending a lot of time trying to get these questions right. You may have heard this. That is absolutely not true. Now, the first 10 questions are when the GMAT is trying to assess your initial score. The GMAT can still change its mind by giving you harder or easier questions. Remember, there's 30 questions in total. So while you want to be a little more careful and you might not want to just guess randomly, you might not want to be careless in the first 10 questions, you definitely do not want to overspend your time on the first 10 questions, because in the formula, each question is actually equally important. Believe it or not, there is no preference in that formula that's given to the first 10 questions. However, there is a penalty for not answering the questions at the end. That is why it's really, really important for you to finish each of the sections on time. What the GMAT is going to do, if you don't get to all of the questions, it will adjust your score down by a proportion of how many questions you got to versus how many questions there were in total on this section. Just want to show you a quick graph. So if you ever find yourself in the situation where there's maybe 5 questions left and there's like a minute left, you definitely do not want to be in that situation. But if you are, your best bet is to randomly guess. You probably will improve your score by about 2 to 3 points, especially if you are at very high scores, by choosing that strategy over the strategy of simply not finishing that section. that could easily mean about 40 or 50 points to your total score. So that could be the difference between a 700 and a 650 if you simply randomly guess versus not finish the section. Now, better yet, manage your time well and finish it on time. Then you can get a 760 and not a 700. Now, you might be wondering, what if my exam is coming up soon? And I've heard that there's actually now an online exam. Now, we have done a seminar about a week ago on the online GMAT. We can send you a recording of that seminar if you'd like. But I would just want to give you a very, very quick summary of what is the difference between the regular exam and the online exam. And then we're going to get to our verbal section. Now, the regular exam is a 3.5-hour long exam that you take at a test center. You need to make a special appointment. It is going to be done on site, so it's not at your premises. It's a special location. It is going to be proctored by live humans that are going to be watching you in real time through a glass window. It is available almost any day of the week. In most of the locations, it's all days except for Sundays. And there's certain limits on how often you can take this test, how many times, and so on. It's an exam that costs $275 US. That's a traditional GMAT exam. However, to address the needs of candidates who are now under time crunch to submit their scores primarily for this year's application cycle, the GMAT came up with an online GMAT, which is a temporary solution that is an exam that is taken at home. It is a shorter exam. It's only 3 hours long. It will be online and remote proctored. So there will be somebody watching you through a web camera and listening to you through a microphone in your computer. It is, however, a cheaper exam. It's only $200 and it's available 24/7. So you can take this exam any day of the week, any time of the day, even late at night. Your appointments are available 24 hours in advance in 15-minute increments. However, this exam can be taken only once. It does not count towards these maximums, so it does not go on your record of your regular GMAT reports, but it can only be taken once. So far, the appointments are available until June 15, and you would register for this exam on that same MBA.com website. So why is this a 3-hour long exam and not 3.5 hours long? Because of the structure of this exam that has been adapted to that at-home delivery. Traditionally, you have an option in which you could choose, you got 3 options for different section orders. So you can either do the traditional order, which is what we said, an essay, IR, then quant and verbal. You can also start with verbal, then do quant, and then do IR and AWA. Or you can start with quant, then do verbal, then IR and AWA. So these are the 3 possible section orders at a test center. However, an at-home exam has a fixed section order, which is essentially a modified version 3. You're going to have a quant section first, then a verbal section without any break, then a short 5-minute break. You are not going to sign in and sign out. Your washroom is probably a little closer. You're at your home. So this is a shorter exam, and it's shorter so that you don't have time to take any notes or look at any resources, while the proctor is not going to be able to monitor you, obviously, in your kitchen or in your washroom. And then an IR section only and no essay. They're also going to be approximately a 15 to 20-minute check-in process. So for the first about 2.5 hours, you are not going to have any break. So please, when you're practicing at home, make sure that you train yourself to be without any food, drink, or bathroom for 2.5 hours, which is a little bit longer than this seminar tonight. Now, you're also going to not be able to use a pen and paper. You're going to be using an online notepad. This online notepad is available to practice on MBA.com. So please make sure that you take some time to get comfortable with it. The only reason to be afraid of something is that if you don't know what to expect. Now, if you do know what to expect, and it is really important for you to take an online exam because you need to submit that score soon to your schools, you have no choice but to use the online notepad. So make sure that you practice and get familiar with it. On the IR section only, you are going to be also given a calculator. You're not given a calculator on a quant section, and certainly you do not need it on a verbal section. Now, you actually don't even need it on a quant section. Believe it or not, it would be nice to have it, but you don't need it because all of the numbers are fairly easy. And that actually brings us to an important point. As we talked about all of this, and you are trying to wrap your head around what this GMAT is all going to be about, and you're really trying to reflect on maybe what you have done so far. I know many of you have already been studying, as you've mentioned in that first poll that we've done. Perhaps you are starting to wonder, or maybe even question, can I really get a good score? And what do I actually need to get that good score? How do I do this? Maybe I'm not really a math person. Maybe English isn't really my first language. So what would be necessary for me to get that score? Well, let me give you good news. And the good news is that anyone can get that score. Regardless of your background, you absolutely can get this score of 700 or more. Because remember, all of the basic knowledge is from secondary school, right? Basic algebra, basic arithmetic, as well as some really basic knowledge of English. So what's really going to determine your success or failure on this test, not really a failure, but maybe a lower score, is how you're going to approach your studies. What are you actually going to do to achieve that score? So here's what many people do, is they say, oh, here's an exam. And how do I normally do an exam? I've done an exam in college or university. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit the books. Maybe the night before or the week before. I very often would be talking to someone who would say, my exam's in a week. I know the deadline. I've just figured that I need to do my GMAT. What do I need to do in a week? What book should I read? Right? And of course, without good advice, sometimes we go to a bookstore or go online in these days and we say, okay, what are good books? So maybe these are good books, the official guide. Or maybe our friends will say, these are good books. There's 10 of them. So there's got to be more in these books. Right? Or maybe I need something complete. Or maybe I just need to crack the GMAT, or I need the latest and greatest. And before we know it, we overwhelm ourselves with so much material, so much information, that many people on the GMAT, after beginning to study, give up. So if hitting the books isn't really what seems to work, then what many people would say, the secret to doing well on the GMAT is actually you just need to practice. Just the more you practice, the more comfortable you're going to be with this material, right? Well, I just want to give you one quick analogy. How many of you work for a large company? I know I worked for a very large company for about 10 years, and I've seen people who've been there for about 30 years, and they're just waiting for their pension to come, and they've been practicing exactly the same thing for 30 years. And then I come in and, I don't want to praise myself, but maybe let's say some other people who maybe you have just been there for a year and you're doing a much better job. And yet they've been practicing for so many years. So practice also isn't necessarily going to help. There's a very important missing step in this process. And we are going to talk about this missing step. So please stay tuned. We'll talk about the verbal theory a little bit, then we'll come back to this step that's really, really important that many people miss. But just one thing, one thought I want to put in your mind is that if you want to get good results in anything, here's the secret formula. All you need to do is figure out what the majority of the people are doing who are not getting good results, and make sure you do not repeat their mistakes. So make sure you don't do what they do. Or better yet, if you know those successful people, if you know the people who are actually doing well in a certain field or certain area, maybe they're really good in financial investments, or they're really good at relationships, or they're really good at fishing, or the GMAT. They're doing something other people don't do. So learn from them. Learn from the top 10% of people. Because we talked about this a little bit, and I just want to give you one final quote, and then we'll get to our verbal section. And that is that in order for you to do well on the GMAT, the knowledge that you need to possess is all from secondary school. So beyond this knowledge, everything is really these advanced reasoning skills. And again, this is a quote from the GMAT. Everything from a secondary school. If somebody told you that the theory on the GMAT is from high school, don't believe them. It's from secondary school, 95% of it. So then, because all of this was in a high school textbook or a secondary school textbook, and everybody could read this textbook, or I imagine at some point everybody did read this textbook, then how do we do well? Well, we'll come back to this missing step, but that very first step is perhaps hitting the book or maybe reviewing what was in the book is still important, because we do need to have some basic understanding of the structure of the English language. So let us go back and review what we've learned in school. This is a well-forgotten theory from school. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about our sentences first. So now we're getting deeper into the verbal reasoning section. Well, you are going to be essentially correcting sentences. The GMAT is going to give you a sentence and is going to ask you to choose a better version of that sentence. So what makes a sentence a better sentence? There are going to be three things you're going to be focusing on in a sentence. Firstly, a grammar. Secondly, the meaning of the sentence. And thirdly, the style of the sentence. Right, so we'll talk about this by seeing a few examples. The grammar is how do we put together a sentence? The meaning is what are we trying to convey in this sentence? Because I could have a grammatically correct sentence that conveys an absolutely wrong meaning. For example, I could say, the dog bit Johnny, or Johnny bit the dog. Both grammatically are correct, but the meaning is different. And also, when it comes to the style of the sentence, the GMAT prefers the style of writing that is a little more direct, a little more straightforward, a little easier to understand. For example, I could say, Johnny bit the dog, or the dog was bitten by Johnny. Well, the first one is a little more direct. It uses an active voice, and that would be preferred on the GMAT. Now, what scares the majority of the people in sentence correction is that there are so many grammar rules that you could potentially know on the GMAT. English is a very complicated language not because the grammar is super, super complicated compared to some of the other languages. It's actually easier. But because English isn't a pure language, it was actually created out of a lot of other languages, a little bit of French, a little bit of German, a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of Latin. There are many exceptions to the rules. Therefore, when you are learning these rules, you also need to learn exceptions. And it seems overwhelming. Well, the good news is you need to know only a small number of rules. Only a very small number, less than 10, or fewer than 10 rules are actually commonly tested on the GMAT. And the most important rule that is tested on the GMAT, and one of the most common rules tested, is the rule of an agreement. So what does it mean, an agreement? Well, let's break down the structure of sentences a little bit before we get into that agreement. First of all, every sentence in the English language must have two things. First, a subject, which is what or whom the sentence is about. And secondly, a verb, which is what this subject is doing. Having both are really important in a sentence. Sometimes the GMAT will very cleverly hide one of them, or one of them might be missing. For example, I could say, Sergey is studying for the GMAT, or I could say, Sergey studying for the GMAT. Well, that word studying is still there, but the is now missing, and the verb is studying all of a sudden became what's called a participle, which is a different part of the speech. So now this is not a complete sentence because the verb is actually missing. So you gotta be careful because in longer sentences, it would be really easy to miss. And of course, the GMAT will do that on purpose. So having a subject and having a verb is really important. But in addition to that, you also need to make sure that the subject and a verb agree. So what does it mean, agree? Well, what this means is that if you have a subject that is a singular subject that is describing one of something, then you also need a singular verb. For example, you can say a bird sings. Now, if you have a plural subject, for example, birds, you need to have plural verbs. For example, birds sing. Looks very straightforward. Well, the GMAT will find a way to make things complicated. So we'll do a question in a moment. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about the different roles that nouns can play in a sentence. So nouns can certainly be subjects. And by the way, noun is a person, a place, or a thing. So if that noun is doing something in the sentence, it would be called a subject of a sentence. It would have a verb. For example, Sergey studies for the GMAT. So Sergey is a subject, studies is a verb. Now the GMAT here isn't really doing anything. It is still a noun, it's a test, but it doesn't have a verb. Therefore, it will be an object, not a subject. So what's really important to remember is when you are trying to decide in a sentence what verb you need to use or what's the proper form of a noun or a subject, remember that the rule of an agreement, a subject and a verb agreement, applies only to subjects and not to objects, because objects in a sentence do not perform any action. Therefore, they don't have a verb, and therefore there's nothing they should agree with, at least when it comes to this rule. So this is a very useful rule, but there's another super useful rule that is going to save you a ton of time on the GMAT, and that is the rule of a preposition. So what are prepositions? So prepositions are these very short words that connect nouns together. For example, I could say, I'm giving this book to Johnny. Now, Johnny is an object in this sentence, and I'm preceding that noun, Johnny, with a preposition to. So words such as of, in, for, or to, or about, or above, or below, these are all called prepositions. And whenever you see these short words that connect the nouns together, what comes after them is always an object, never a subject. What this means is that you would never use these words to match them with verbs. So if you have trouble understanding where is my subject and where is my object, which is going to happen quite often, remember this rule. Just look for prepositions. Now, we're not quite done with the agreement yet. There's another agreement rule. There are actually two agreement rules on the GMAT. The first one was the subject-verb agreement, and the second one was the pronoun agreement. Now, the pronouns are the very short words that replace nouns. These are words that are used so that we can have a more elegant speech. For example, we could say Sergey studies for the GMAT because he would like to go to a good school, instead of so that Sergey would like. Now, we can keep repeating the name Sergey many times. This is not going to be a good sentence. That's why we're going to say he. Now, whenever you are replacing something with something else, there is a chance that you will choose the wrong thing to replace it with. Anytime you're doing any sort of an operation in a sentence, there is a chance you might potentially make a mistake. And therefore, when you are replacing a noun with a pronoun, it is possible that you would choose the wrong pronoun. Therefore, if you see a pronoun that you are suspicious about, you need to immediately make sure that two of the rules are observed. The rule number one is that the pronoun refers very clearly to the noun it is replacing. So you know who is he. It is Sergey, not the GMAT. And also the pronoun agrees with the noun it's replacing. For example, you would not say Sergey would like to study for the GMAT because they want to go to a good school. Well, who is they? We were talking about Sergey. Sergey is singular, therefore he would be appropriate. So, looks very straightforward, right? I want to make sure you're very comfortable with these rules. So I'd like to give you a couple of examples, and I will ask you, what do you think about these examples and whether the pronouns here were used properly? Here's the first example. Please let me know if the pronoun here was used properly, yes or no. And if no, then why not? Please just put it in the chat box. Okay, some of you are saying yes, some of you are saying no. Well, let's think about this. Logically, if Melissa is visiting Elizabeth in the hospital, that probably means that Elizabeth is in the hospital, and therefore Elizabeth is probably feeling unwell, logically. However, it is also possible that Elizabeth is a doctor and Melissa is visiting her in the hospital. So sometimes the rules of logic don't really apply. Certainly when it comes to the agreement rule, you should not be making any assumptions. Therefore, this pronoun was not used properly. We don't really know who was she. It could be Melissa, it could be Elizabeth. This was not a pronoun used properly. If we want to fix this error, we would have to use the name of that person. So instead of she, we would actually say Melissa or Elizabeth. Let me give you another example. I love shopping at Walmart because they have good prices. What do you think? What's a pronoun and has it been used properly? Yes, been used properly. Okay, some of you are saying yes. Okay, some of you are saying no. Most of you are saying yes. Well, the pronoun here is they. And in our spoken everyday language, we do use they all the time, whenever it doesn't even belong necessarily. Well, when we're talking about shopping at Walmart, we automatically assume that it's maybe at Walmart stores, or we left shopping was Walmart people. However, Walmart is the name of the company. It is one name. Therefore, the proper pronoun to be used here is the pronoun it, because it has good prices, right? So there are actually two agreement rules here that were violated. It was both the pronoun agreement as well as the subject verb agreement, because it has good prices. Sounds awkward, but that is actually what will be grammatically correct, because Walmart is singular, it's one company. Well, let me give you a couple of more examples, or rather challenges. What would be the right usage? You and I or you and me in this example? This GMAT class is for you and I, or the GMAT class is for you and me? What do you think? What is right? Okay, some of you are saying you and I, some of you are saying you and me. It's about a 50-50 split so far. All right, well, what is the difference? You can focus on it from two perspectives. First of all, from a grammatical perspective, and secondly, from what can I actually do on a test day? So from a grammatical perspective, the difference between I and me is the difference between a subject and an object. I is a subject, I am studying for the GMAT, and me is an object. This GMAT class is delivered to me. The trick is that you is the same in both, and that's what really throws us off. So if you want to do this on a test day, just simply remove the you. Would you say the GMAT class is for I, or this GMAT class is for me? Well, of course, the GMAT class is for me, and therefore you and me is going to be the proper usage. And me is an object. And remember, we just learned the super useful rule. I mentioned we are going to use it again. There was a rule of a preposition. The preposition here was for. And what comes after the preposition is always an object. Therefore, it's for me because me is an object. And that's exactly the same rule that we're going to use in the second one. Who or whom is this class for? Now, most of us use who everywhere, we don't really know, the majority of us, certainly I don't use who or whom properly in my spoken everyday language. But the difference between who and whom is, again, the difference between a subject and an object. Who is a subject? Who is studying for the GMAT? And whom is an object? For whom is this class? Again, we see this preposition for. So congratulations, if you chose whom, that is absolutely the right answer. All right, well, let's now use what we've just learned to tackle a real GMAT question. Now we'll do one question together. I'll need a little bit of your help. And then we are going to do one question. I'm going to give you time to do one question yourself. So let's look at this question. Now, we'll do this question together. I'll actually demonstrate how we do this question. And you can follow along on the screen. Here's what this original sentence says. The recent boom in the technology and finance sectors in the economy shows there are now wealth of economic opportunities for young Americans, but only for those with strong analytical skills. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was reading this sentence, it kind of looks okay to me. I don't really feel like anything's wrong with it. And maybe there isn't anything wrong because an answer choice A is the same as the original sentence. So we'll get to this in a moment. But if you rely on what sounds right, then very often you're going to find yourself choosing the wrong answer. Because as you've already seen, many of us don't speak in a proper written English, and therefore what you might choose based on what sounds right to you might not necessarily be right grammatically. So what we would need then is to use some of the rules of grammar. If you look at the answer choices, you probably would notice, just by quickly scanning them up and down, you would notice that there's a pretty significant difference between the answer choices. Did anybody notice that pretty significant difference between A, B, C, D, and E? It's right at the beginning of these answer choices. Yeah, absolutely, Kaylee. It's is versus are. So for us to decide, obviously only one of them will be right, and we need to decide which one. So for us to do so, for us to decide whether we need to use a singular or a plural verb, we need to figure out what is the subject. So I'll give you about 20 seconds or so. Find the subject, put it in the chat box. Just tell me what the subject is. Okay, all right. Well, the majority of you said that the subject is a boom, or recent boom in the technology and finance sectors of the economy. Now, here's something interesting, is that a recent boom is indeed, yeah, some of you are saying economy. So recent boom is indeed the subject of this sentence. However, this is a multi-clause sentence. So what this means is that inside one sentence, you could have more than one pair of a subject and a verb. And that is what we're seeing here. The recent boom shows. This means that the boom already has a verb, and that is the verb shows. So that is not the subject we should be focusing on. So what is that subject we should be focusing on? The subject we haven't addressed yet. Okay, some of you are saying the economy, saying wealth, finance sectors, economic opportunities. Okay, so it looks like there's a number of them. Now, first of all, you might think maybe it's the technology and finance sectors, maybe it's the economy. Well, there's a very helpful rule that you can use here in this sentence, and that is a rule of an inverted sentence. So what is an inverted sentence? That is, whenever you have a structure such as there is or there are, notice where the noun will be in relation to your verb. If I am saying Sergey studies for the GMAT, then I put the noun first and the verb second. But when I'm saying there are people on the seminar tonight, then notice how the verb is actually before the subject. The verb are is before the subject people. That is what's called an inverted sentence. And whenever we have a structure, there is or there are, the verb is going to be before. What this means is whenever you see there is or there are on the GMAT, always look for a subject after there is or there are, not before. So the boom, the technology, the sectors, or the economy are not the right subjects because they're before our verb in that inverted sentence. So now we've narrowed down our list to a few more nouns after there is or there are. And some of you are saying it's the economic opportunities, some of you are saying it's young Americans. So if it's economic opportunities or young Americans, then the answer will of course be are. However, there's a second very helpful rule that we've just learned, and that is the rule of a preposition. Now remember we said that you could use that rule to get rid of the objects and narrow down your list to just the subjects. Economic opportunities have an of right before them, and young Americans have a for before them. So none of those are our subject. And the only subject that's left is a wealth. By the way, for that very reason, if you didn't pick up that there was an inverted sentence, the technology and finance sectors have the in front of them, and the economy has the of in front of it. So the only thing that's left is a wealth. And by the way, it's a wealth. So just in case you're not familiar with the use of an article a in the English language, it always refers to a singular noun. Therefore, the are is going to be incorrect. We can get rid of all of the answer choices with are because a wealth is singular. 3 answer choices are left. There are C, D, and E. And if you read them carefully, you would notice there's only one difference between them. Has anybody picked up what is the only difference between C, D, and E? There's only one difference. What is it? Yes, thank you. I kind of gave it away. It's the word only. Exactly. The word only is modifying a word after it or sometimes before it. It essentially describes something. It could describe a noun or a verb. But now we're dealing much more about with the meaning of the sentence. If you look at C, D, and E, you would notice that E places only in an incorrect place. You don't really modify the word but. It should modify as either a noun or a verb. D says that these people have only strong analytical skills. That means they don't really have any other skills, which makes absolutely 0 sense. And C is the only one that does make sense and is also grammatically correct, but only for these people. That is why C is right. So if you did get C, congratulations. But if you didn't get C, don't worry. We are now going to use the skills that we have just learned to approach one additional question. Because it's really important as soon as you learn a new strategy that you practice that strategy right away. So I am going to give you one more sentence correction question that tests an agreement rule. And I'm going to give you approximately 1 minute and 30 seconds. I'm going to be quiet during this time. And I'm going to ask you to choose an answer at the end of these 1 minute and 30 seconds. So let's go. All right, it has been 1 minute and 30 seconds. So if you haven't voted yet, then please vote for the right answer. It's also interesting how answer choices change based on how much time you took to select the answer. Okay, just give you 2 more seconds to choose an answer. I'm going to end this poll right now, and I'll share the results with you. All right, so by the majority vote, the answer is C. Then the second most popular answer is E, and then we have, as you could see, D, A, and B. But again, we have a distribution of answers, so this certainly is not a very easy question, because regardless of what the right answer is, fewer than half of the people got this right. So we'll see if you got this right. This was an anonymous vote, so you could see for yourself whether you got this right. Now, let me ask you a question. When you were doing this question, did you focus on the agreement, or did you focus on what sounds right or looks right? Because if you focus on what sounds right, you might have probably done this sort of an analysis. You may have thought, okay, so I have sloths, and there's probably more than one of them, and they must hang from the trees, or they must use their limbs. So therefore, I need to use the sloths. And C looks right because it also uses the proper parallel structure, because sloths use their limbs, they sleep 15 hours a day, and they move infrequently. So this is an answer choice that uses that parallel structure properly. So you probably use that rule. If you've learned it already, you might also have thought, well, there's got to be more than one sloth for sure. And you also might have just went by what sounds better, right? All right. Now, if you still focus on the agreement, this is the only rule that we've just learned, you may have noticed that at the very beginning of each answer choice, I have a decision to make, whether I need to use sloths or the sloth. Now, even though logically it doesn't really make sense to use the sloth, however, it is perfectly acceptable to use the name of one animal, because then we refer to the species of that animal, not a specific sloth. So it's actually completely okay from a logical perspective. In fact, the GMAT likes, when it refers to animals, to refer to the species. So it could say the North American bear sleeps the whole winter. So how do we make a decision? How do we actually choose sloth or the sloth? Well, perhaps an agreement rule might help. We've learned 2 agreement rules. The agreement was a verb and an agreement was a pronoun. So let's look for verbs. The challenge, unfortunately, in this sentence is all of the verbs are also underlined. So we don't really know what's right. We don't really have anything to hold on to. And if we really look through all 5 answer choices, we would notice that all of the verbs, hang or hangs or use, do agree with the subject. So we cannot really, unfortunately, use that rule. So perhaps an agreement with a pronoun could help us. It would be really helpful for us to have a pronoun, right? It would be really, really helpful. Oh, wait a second. There is a pronoun. We almost missed it. It was just so short. And in fact, there are 2 of them. So we must have missed both of them. Its coat and its toes. So its means the pronoun was it, and it is singular. Therefore, all of the answer choices with the sloths are gone. They do not agree with our pronoun, its toes, or its coat. So now we have $1 million question. And really, if you've done all of this analysis, and at the end you still choose the wrong answer, then none of it matters, because you get no points for getting close to the answer if you don't choose it right. However, you have a 50-50 chance at this point. This is a much better chance than 1 in 5. Right? If you had 50-50 chance on every single question on the GMAT, you would do really well on the test. Now, most of you at this point chose E. And by the majority vote, that's got to be the right answer. So if anybody wants to share why, just put it in the chat box. Why did you choose E? Just kind of for everybody else to understand that. Okay, sleeps not sleeping. Why sleeps not sleeping? Why should we use sleeps and not sleeping? What's wrong with sleeping? Okay, parallel structure. Perfect. All right, great. So you've learned the rules. This is amazing. This is very impressive. However, I have some bad news for you. Right answer is D, not E. I think you're a little surprised, but let me tell you why E is wrong. Yes, indeed. E adds another pronoun. So the parallel structure means that whenever you have a list in that parallel structure, in which case it's hangs, sleeps, and moves, all of these verbs have to be in the list in exactly the same form. However, we're listing out hangs and then sleeps, and in the moves, we throw in the it. So now we are listing in a full clause, it moves. If the it wasn't there, if it was just hangs, sleeps, and moves, that would be completely acceptable. But the it breaks that structure. And again, that's just a very short word, just 2 letters, and we've missed it again. So be careful. Sentence correction on the GMAT primarily tests your attention to detail. That is the #1 skill tested in the GMAT. It's actually not how well you know English. It's attention to detail. Yeah, you need to know some rules from secondary school. But remember, it's all about reasoning skills. So if E is wrong, D has to be right. There isn't really a reason now for us to analyze D anymore, but just for educational purposes, let me tell you what's right with D. Now, D says this was hangs, comma, sleeping and moving. So sleeping and moving is now a part of a different list. It is a list of modifiers or descriptors, or what's called participles, that are describing the process of hanging. How he hangs or she hangs, or the sloth hangs, it hangs, I guess, is by sleeping and moving. So that is acceptable. And that is what the GMAT will do quite often. These modifiers look almost like they are verbs. Remember we said Sergey is studying versus Sergey is studying. All of a sudden, instead of a verb, that becomes a participle. The same thing here. I gave you these examples on purpose. But of course, whenever you hear something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to use it properly. So by learning these strategies and by doing these exercises, this is how you're going to become very comfortable approaching questions on a real test. Now, if you feel a little unease that perhaps you got this wrong, do not worry. This is a chance for us to learn. Remember, we agreed to get a little outside of a comfort zone. And also, don't worry about not being able to speak well. We don't talk good. In fact, it's not just you who doesn't use the proper language. It is everybody, because the proper written language is not the same as the written language. By the way, somebody was asking what difficulty is this question? Well, about 1/5 of people on this seminar got it right. So it's got to be about the 20th percentile. So numbers wise, probably about 650 or so. Walmart, we talked about the Walmart that has good prices. Well, would you think that the signs in the Walmart store would be using proper grammar? Well, not necessarily. It's something that people can easily understand, and that's how we speak, that's how we write. Therefore, it's really important that you develop these skills of using the proper written English. For example, here on this sign, you would notice the Walmart is saying 12 items or less. That is not proper. 12 items or fewer, that's what we should write, because fewer is used with countable items and less is used with uncountable. And we can certainly count items. So we would not say there are less people today, we would say there are fewer people today. So when you're approaching sentence correction, Please don't choose what sounds right, or looks right, or feels right. You gotta know the rules. You have to learn the strategies, because simply knowing the rules, most of you knew that rule of a parallel structure, and yet you didn't get this right. And then after you've learned these strategies, you gotta practice until you master that process. Sounds easy, right? I wish the GMAT were this easy. It'd be nice if the GMAT were this easy. By the way, just before we move on to the next topic, is this the properly written sentence? What do you think? Was, okay, some of you are saying it was, should be was, right? Well, yes, because the GMAT is a test, right? At GMAT, we don't say the GMATs, it's the GMAT. So I wish the GMAT was this easy. That's what kind of sounds right. But, and the rule seems to be to apply as well. However, I think you might be surprised that this is actually a properly written sentence. It actually is not an idiom, and it's not a verb tense either. It is called the verb mood. You might not have heard of that verbs have moods, but indeed they do, and that is called the subjunctive mood of a verb. Right? Where this easy, we talk about something hypothetical that is not true. That is called a subjunctive mood. So that is a properly written sentence, believe it or not. All right, I think enough about the grammar. Let's talk about arguments. Now, I'm sure you've heard arguments before. You have heard people argue. And on the GMAT, you're going to see arguments. However, the arguments are not going to be the same. You're probably familiar with on the GMAT, you're not going to have two people trying to argue and shout at each other. The arguments on the GMAT are going to involve usually an argument by one person. I don't know if you ever tried to argue with yourself. I know it's always a lot of fun, but that's what the GMAT is going to give you. So how can one person argue? Well, you could if you create a proper structure of an argument. You actually need just two things in an argument for this to be an argument. Number one, you need to have a claim or a conclusion, which is, what are you trying to say? What is your argument all about? Let me give you an example of an argument. I came to the GMAT class today and I decided I really want an MBA. Since I will take my preparation seriously, I will get a high score on the GMAT. So what is my claim? It is that I will get a high score on the GMAT. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Now, simply giving you the statement isn't enough. This is something that the GMAT is going to call an unsupported claim. So the hint there is I need some support. And that is my evidence, also known as a premise, also known as the support behind that claim. And in that specific argument, the support was, I will take my preparation seriously. That is why I'll get a high score on the GMAT. I'm not going to double in the GMAT. I'm not going to just try studying here and there. I will take it seriously. That is why I'm going to get a high score. Now, you might also get some background information. For example, I came to the GMAT class, I decided I really want to do an MBA. Yeah, that's interesting, but it doesn't actually add to my argument. If I didn't come to the GMAT class today, it's still that important, and it's still not that important. The fact that I will take my preparation seriously tells us that I will get a high score. And by the way, that's why you probably showed up to this class, because you're taking the preparation seriously. So I need a conclusion and I need an evidence. And that is why it's really important that when you're looking at the argument, you're able to break the argument down. We looked at the first argument today, and we've identified immediately that the claim of the conclusion was at the very beginning of the argument. So would a good argument always have a conclusion at the beginning of the argument? What do you think? Should it always have a conclusion at the beginning? Could it maybe have a conclusion at the end? Or maybe could it even have it in the middle? It could. So that's really helpful, right? So how do I find that conclusion? Well, there are a few different ways to find the conclusion. Essentially, you need to focus on how the argument, again, is structured. Let me give you a couple of examples. You could say, for example, I will take my preparation seriously, therefore, I will get a high score on the GMAT. Well, that word therefore tells us that the conclusion is coming. You can also sometimes focus on finding the evidence. For example, I will get a high score on the GMAT After all, I'll take my preparation seriously. That word after all tells us that the evidence is coming. You can also sometimes present somebody else's opinion and disagree with it. For example, I could say, somebody told me I won't get a high score on the GMAT, and this person is wrong, because I will take my preparation seriously. So what am I actually trying to say? I'm not really trying to say that this person is wrong. I'm not really trying to make anybody wrong. I'm just trying to say that I will get a high score on the GMAT. And if somebody is saying I won't, then they're incorrect. So my conclusion is I will get a high score. So that's how you can find the conclusion. Really look for the structural keywords that are going to help you understand where the conclusion is. Once you find it, everything else is going to be easier. Why don't we practice? Why don't I now give you, again, a real GMAT question. I'm going to give you exactly 2 minutes, but not more. And after about 1 minute, 30 seconds, I'm going to launch a poll. And I'm going to ask you what you think is the right answer, and then we'll talk about this question. I'll stay quiet for the next 2 minutes. Here's the question. All right, the time is up. Let me stop the questionnaire and let's see what is the right answer. By the majority vote, the right answer is B with 50%. Then we have C, E, D, and A. So again, a lot of variety in our answers. So let's take a look. I'm going to show you some of the ways of doing this question. I'm going to share with you, and perhaps you can try to find if you have used any of these ways. Well, let's take a look. One of the strategies we could use is the strategy of what sounds right, in which case you're going to read the passage, then read the question, read the answer choices. It was a little hard at first to understand what the question was asking. So I'm just curious if anybody read the passage more than once, or maybe the answer choices more than once. It is actually pretty common. And then you would look at the answer choices and see which one makes the most sense. So A kind of sounds a little weird because I'm looking for something that has to do with an earthquake, with the island, with the city of Kurion, and with AD 365. B seems familiar. History is mentioned, an earthquake, 365, so that looks good. C, we talk about the coins. Again, not really sure what it's all about. Small statues, stone inscriptions. So if we go by what sounds right, then B definitely sounds good. We probably then go back and look at the passage again, maybe look at the question, look at the answer choice, maybe read them more than once, make sure we don't have a better way of doing the question, and then choose B and move on. Now, I've cut you off after 2 minutes, but if I gave you more time, you might have spent maybe 4 minutes on doing this question. So that is pretty common while you're doing these questions. Now, let's look at a different way. Let's call this the rules way. This is when we learn some of the rules of how to approach questions on the GMAT. And that is the first thing we should read is the question. The question is actually under the passage. And the question here asks, which one of the following most strongly supports the hypothesis? So that is a strengthened question. Our job is to strengthen that argument. So what we're going to do is we'll now read the passage, we'll identify the conclusion and evidence, then we're going to find an answer choice that strengthens our conclusion. Our conclusion is that hypothesis that the town was destroyed by an earthquake. So we're going to be looking for an answer choice that strengthens it. Well, let's take a look. A seems quite irrelevant. Drinking vessels, what does it have to do with the earthquake? B does strengthen it. That's great. Now we have more evidence to believe that this is what happened. C, D, and E all seem irrelevant. Therefore, we're going to pick B. We know the rule. We're a little more confident. We can do this in 2 minutes, and we get the wrong answer because B is not right. So again, by the majority vote, it was the right answer, but it's actually not. So let's look at a different way of doing these questions, or this question. Now, we do indeed start with knowing the rules, and that is a strengthened question. So we absolutely are going to read the question first. Then we're going to read the passage, and we'll identify the conclusion and the evidence. Now, the conclusion there was that these archaeologists hypothesized that the town was destroyed by the earthquake that occurred in AD 365. So what do they know already? There's always some sort of a gap in strengthened questions. That is the gap we're trying to address. So what we know already is that there was an earthquake in AD 365. That's what we know, because there are words there known to have occurred. Okay, so we know there was an earthquake. We also have a pretty good evidence to believe that there is some pattern of debris and collapsed buildings. So all of this points to the fact that there probably was an earthquake that destroyed the town. And that's all we know. So we know there was an earthquake that destroyed the town. We also know there was an earthquake that specific year. However, where the gap is, we don't really know that it was that earthquake that destroyed it. It is possible, and it actually does not go against our evidence, that the town was destroyed by some other earthquake that happened maybe at some other time, maybe like 100 years before that, or 100 years after that. And then there was still an earthquake in AD 365. That's completely okay, but it's not the earthquake that destroyed the town. So we are going to be looking for evidence that tells us that very likely it was that specific earthquake and not something else. Well, let's see which answer choice will actually do that. A doesn't give us any extra information. It gives us the years preceding and following, so not really going to help. Now, B, which is the trap we've all got into, or the majority of us, or at least half of us, is that we took this as a new piece of evidence that strengthens our conclusion. However, B just simply restates what we already know. We already know from the passage that there was an earthquake in AD 365. Therefore, B does not do anything to our argument. It certainly does not strengthen it. Now, how about C? Now, C tells us that we have found no coins after 365. So what this means is that there probably was some sort of a significant disruption in the life of that city in AD 365. So if we add this piece of evidence to what we already know, the fact that there was an earthquake and the fact that the town was destroyed by an earthquake, this gives us enough additional evidence to have a better belief that the town was actually destroyed by that earthquake. So this answer choice does definitely strengthen. It doesn't prove it 100%, but it does strengthen it. And that's all we're looking for. And because there's only one right answer on the GMAT, we can stop. And after less than a minute, if we know what to focus on, we can get this question right. If you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box. We'll certainly address them at the end of our seminar. But I want to really quickly talk about the third question type, and that is reading comprehension. Now, maybe you want to preface this with a question: do you get excited about reading comprehension? Like, who gets super excited about reading comprehension? Every time you see reading comprehension, like, oh my God, bring them on. I really love them. Yes, yes. Shweta, no. Okay, it's just no. Very unemotional. Never. Yes, absolutely. Most of us, oh, wow. Kaylee was saying some of the passages are interesting. Well, there are ways, of course, to trick your brain into thinking they are exciting, because reading comprehension indeed uses passages from real scientific, mostly scientific journals. So you can learn something. And the reason why we're so discouraged when we read reading comprehension is because either we read about something we know nothing about, so we think we're not experts, so how can we possibly do well? Or we're trying to learn this, we're trying to become experts within 3 to 4 minutes, and we know we've lost this game before we even began. So I'm going to teach you a very simple strategy of how you can begin rewiring your brain for reading comprehension. How essentially you're going to begin thinking about reading comprehension passages. What you need to remember is that what the author is saying is not that important. What is important is how the author is saying it. The how is more important than what, because you will forget what the subject matter is, and there's absolutely no way for you to prepare for what is going to come. But there absolutely is a way for you to prepare to how it's going to come, because many passages are fairly predictable if you've learned how to deal with them and you practiced enough. So don't need to know anything about the subject matter. You can't be expected to do so. Instead, you're taking a job of a critic. You are evaluating that piece of work, and you're trying to understand how the author is creating a narrative. What is the story behind that passage? So how are you going to actually read the passage? You're going to now read for the structure, not for the content. So how do you read for the structure? You are going to, first of all, stop as you're reading. You're going to make some pauses, and you're going to make some notes. Now, we spent in our class about 2 hours going through the actual process of reading, what to focus on, what keywords to focus on, how to take notes. So I'm trying to give you a very short executive summary of how you're going to do this within 2 minutes. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to stop after each paragraph, and you're going to ask yourself a question. What was the purpose of this paragraph? How was this passage organized? How are the paragraphs related to each other? When you finish reading, when you answer this question for each paragraph, what was that purpose? Then you're going to ask yourself a question. What was this whole passage about? If I were to write a title for this passage, what would be a good title for me to write? You're then going to ask yourself this question. What is the tone or emotion behind the author's words? Was the author fairly neutral, or was the author trying to convince us of something? And finally, why did the author write this passage? What was the primary purpose of that entire passage? If you ask yourself these questions, then you're going to be well on your way of doing really well on reading comprehension, because everything else is going to be about knowing how to deal with questions. Now, the most common question type in reading comprehension is what's called an inference question. This is when you need to take one step away from the passage and really try to understand what the author was thinking. And therefore, answering all of these questions is going to help you deal with inference questions. So reading is going to be a skill, just like many other skills on the GMAT. So how do you actually master this skill? I'm going to now share with you that missing step and what would be the steps that you will take to master any of these skills, quant and verbal, doesn't matter. And of course, we'll have a little bit of time at the end to talk about the application process. So I'll share with you what does it actually take to get into good schools. So how do you master these skills? Well, remember we said many people, they hit the books and they essentially learn the rules. So I want to use an analogy of driving a car. So that would be like learning the rules of the road. And then many people would be saying, okay, I know the rules, let me go and practice. And the GMAT, by the way, is a very competitive exam. So imagine that you're trying to hop into a Formula One race car and you're just gonna say, okay, give me the keys, I'm just gonna go on the racetrack. I know the rules, so I can just go and drive. So there is an important skill, there is an important step, and that step is actually the step from how you learn to drive. The first step was indeed learning the rules. And that's what you're going to do in the GMAT. You're going to learn the theory, and that is going to be before you even come to our classroom, a virtual classroom or an in-person classroom when we reopen. But before you do that, we want to make sure you learn the theory. That's why we include in all of our classes access to these theory exercises. I know many other GMAT prep courses charge a lot more money for this access to theory exercises. I know there's another company that charges $300 for it. Well, I think it's a really important foundational step. That's why we've decided to include it with all of our classes for free. You're going to be doing a number of exercises so that you can remember what you've learned in school, some of these more basic secondary school skills. Then, of course, the second step is you need to learn the strategies. That's what the GMAT classes are for. Because if you practice a lot, just like those people at my job, they were there for 30 years, just ready to retire, they keep doing the same thing because they haven't taken the time to relearn. So it's really important that you learn the good strategies up front. That's why if you were to take a GMAT class or hire a GMAT tutor, I would suggest that you do that before you really invest a lot of time into your practice, not after. Because if you practice something for a long time, you're going to get really good at that thing. And if that is not an efficient strategy, you're going to reinforce your inefficient strategy. And at the end, it might be much harder to retrain yourself. And that is why it's a lot easier going to be for you to give up. In fact, I know I've shared this before with some of you if you came to our earlier seminars. This is the official statistics from the GMAT of everybody who creates an account on MBA.com. That means these people actually share their information because they want at some point to do the test. They download the software or they look at some questions. Of them, only 10%, 10% will actually end up registering for the GMAT because many other people give up. They don't take the time to learn the good strategies up front. And also, when you're beginning to learn good strategies, something else might happen is when you try to use these strategies, at first, you won't be successful. Because if you've never used them before, you will be making mistakes. Even if you've seen Michael Schumacher driving that car, if you get into that car yourself, you'll say, well, I've seen it all. He explained to me exactly how to do it. You'll keep making mistakes at first. So it's really important that you have that environment that reinforces your good habits and gives you feedback on any of the things you still need to improve. That's why having that instructor next to you that keeps you safe and gives you feedback is really, really important in this process. And then, of course, coming to class but not practicing isn't really going to help. You do need to continue mastering the skills. Between the classes, our program is 6 weeks long. So between the classes, we are going to give you lots of homework to do. And after the classes, you need to continue mastering the skills until you feel that you're ready for the test. You're going to be doing practice sets as well as full-length 3 hour, 3.5 hour practice tests, both from paper books and from the online resources, of which, by the way, we are going to provide you with all of them that you need. So you don't have to go and buy any additional resources. The only thing you need to invest in is the real test. And certainly our hope is that you're going to do this only once because it is a pretty expensive test. Now, if you'd like to join us, it is a program that's been around for many years. So our company has been around for over 20 years. We are actually from the 20th century, believe it or not. We've been around for longer than some of the better known worldwide names, but our company has been founded in 1998. So we've been offering GMAT classes for a very long time, and our flagship program is called the GMAT Mastery Program. It's approximately a 50-hour program, usually in a live class or in a live in-person class, but it's also available on demand, so you can get recordings to all of our classes. So either of the formats, whatever works better for you. It is a fairly small class, regardless of whether it's online or in person. We actually use a two-way technology, not Zoom, where you guys cannot talk right now. You can just put things in the chat box, but in a real class, you will be able to talk and share your video. We give you all the resources, and there's lots of perks included, because the GMAT is a fairly difficult test, so we know it might potentially take you time to do really well, and we want to be with you there every step of the way. From the very beginning that you commit to this journey, such as today, to the very end when you get that acceptance letter. We'll give you advice on your application, we'll give you some private one-on-one tutoring sessions, and we'll let you come back to a class completely free for 1 year. Or actually a little bit longer right now. It will be a year from the time we reopen. So if you take the online program right now, we will let you upgrade to an in-person class, a live online to an in-person class at no extra cost, and we'll extend that retake period for a year from the time we reopen. But right now, our classes do continue in a live online format. We have two formats, an evening and a weekend. Our evening programs are always at night. This is Eastern time, so after work. The next course starts on May 5th. It is the soonest, it's just a week from now. And then the next weekend program is a morning program. So it's Saturday, Sunday morning, and it starts at the end of May. We also offer an evening program. It actually started 2 weeks ago. There are still some discounts. We offer early bird discounts depending on when you register. We've extended these discounts for a couple of extra days just to help you guys make a decision. So if you register for the May 5th course, as long as you register no later than this Thursday, and all you need to do is just make a $500 deposit, you're going to save $100 on the evening program and $200 on the next weekend program at the end of May. And I'll show you exactly what it is. And I'm not showing the prices yet because it's different in different currencies. And of course, we do give you a guarantee that we are going to be working with you until that time that you are going to be ready for the test. Now, I know you've been putting some questions in the Q&A. I will absolutely address them in a moment. Now, we do provide the entire end-to-end process. So let me share with you how your studies are going to work. First of all, you're going to be working on some refresher exercises. Then you're going to be taking classes. And then you're going to be doing lots of exercises. Right now, everything is going to be online, but that middle step is going to be in a live online format, just like right now, but a little more interactive. At the end of your classes, you're going to be still enjoying support from our instructors one-on-one. You're welcome to come back to classes, like I mentioned, either live, online, or in person. And the idea is by the time you go to the real test, you're going to have a toolkit so you can deal with absolutely every question that might come your way on the real test. Now, if you've already maybe have taken a class somewhere else, so if you've been studying extensively, or if your exam is coming up very shortly, then you could get access to only our online practice platform. We have a special offer right now. It is $200 off. It is normally $600 Canadian or $500 US. So now it's a $200 discount. And we're also going to be offering a free 7-day trial. It's also available only until April 30th, so until this Thursday. So if you decide to try that platform out, please reach out to us. Go to admitmaster.com/offer. There'll be a button to sign up for a consultation. Somebody is going to call you. And as long as we know that you came to this seminar, we're going to be able to give you that offer. Now, speaking about these special offers, you're going to find all of this on the website. There's a discount of these live online classes, and there's also a price for the on-demand classes. There's some extra bonus that we offer as well. And the fee for the live online classes is $16.99 Canadian, $13.99 US. and you're going to be getting $100 or $200 off these prices. This is less than our in-person classes. And remember, they do all come with private tutoring, free course retakes, and a lot of hours in class. So if you are comparing with some of the other classes, I know there's a class, for example, offered at Manhattan Prep for $13.99 as well, but it's half the number of hours, no course retakes, and no private tutoring included. So when you're compare apples to apples. And of course, if you are in Canada, we have a slightly better exchange rate for you. It's going to be $16.99 Canadian. Now, this is a course that's designed for people who need to score in the 700s. So everything we're going to teach you is going to be focused on teaching you the skill of the test. It is absolutely possible, and it is quite common for our students to get scores in the 700s. In fact, I'm going to show you statistics from the last year. It hasn't really been changed in the last few years. It's pretty much been the same. The average scores of people worldwide who are doing the GMAT is about 560, but the average scores of our students are 670. So it's quite a bit higher, and 1 in 3 of our students will achieve a score of 700 or more. So I believe this is very, very impressive. And certainly, if you would like to get a score of 700, as long as you focus on developing these skills, learn these strategies up front, you can do very well as well, regardless of your background. Now, when you're trying to decide what score do I actually need to get into these schools, I just want to share with you some of the averages at these schools. If you are thinking of applying to top schools in the United States, these are the average scores. Top schools in Canada, these are the average scores, and European schools are somewhere in between, so around 700, 710. Again, the average score in the GMAT is 560. But when you're thinking about these scores, what really is important are the percentile scores. So 95th percentile, what does it actually mean? Or 700, what does it mean in terms of percentiles? Well, all this means is that you're competing against everybody who hasn't given up, everybody who's invested time into preparing, and everybody who actually showed up for the real test. There's approximately 600,000 people who do this every 3 years. So your score gets measured against all of these people in the last 3 years. And to get a score of 700, all you need to do is beat 530,000 people out of this 600. So that should be really easy, right? So hopefully there's a little bit of motivation for you. And then when you're thinking about this, okay, so the GMAT's one part that takes the longest, but what else do I need? So I'm going to give you just a couple of extra tips in the next 10 minutes about what else would you need and how do you actually position your application. But before that, just because in case you are not interested in hearing that, I just want to share with you what are some of the other events that are coming up. If you are thinking of applying to a school in Canada, we have invited a few top Canadian schools this Thursday during lunchtime to answer your questions about the application process this year and how it's been affected by this whole situation right now. So this is going to be an awesome event to attend. Please make sure that you register for this event. I'm going to give you a link in just a couple of slides. We also do a lot of work around the psychology of the test. We invite different speakers who are just amazing, amazing speakers. So we'll be doing a seminar. You might have already been at one of our seminars with Rory Sheehan. So he wrote a number of books about how our brain works, how you can tune in your brain for peak performance. He's going to be doing a session on how you create emotional connections to trigger some really good emotions in yourself that can help you do exceptionally well on a test. That's going to be 2 weeks from now on May 7th. That seminar is only $20, and you can attend 2 seminars during lunchtime and at night, and these seminars are not recorded. Then there will be a master pressure seminar in approximately 2 weeks on May 12th. Our live online classes start the evening one on May 5th. The weekend is on May 23rd. And you can find all of that on admitmaster.com/offer. So before we end, let me share with you a couple of admissions tips. First of all, you might be wondering, how do I choose an MBA program? How do I actually choose what program is going to be best for me? And you might also be wondering, well, how does an MBA program choose me? What is going to be that thing that goes into their decision? How do I actually make sure that I get into the program I really want to? And that I want to preface by a quote from The Economist, that was doing research. It's in a magazine, as I'm sure you know, was doing research about how companies hire after MBA. And what they found is some of the top companies, consulting, investment banking, go and hire from top business schools, not because people at these business schools have learned something different that they haven't learned in some other schools, but because it was so difficult to get into these schools that if I am Google and I'm going to Stanford to hire the next manager, I know everybody's going to be really good. I just need to find the best fit, but I know everybody's already super, super qualified. So that is why when you're thinking about getting into a business school, you gotta remember that it's really not about what you learn. It's about getting into the right school. It's about the selection. It's about you choosing the school and the school choosing you. So how do you choose the school? I'm going to tell you my personal story. How did I choose my MBA program? I was a little ignorant, and by the way, it was a while ago. I know I look young, but I'm much older than you think. I'm retired, remember? So I did my MBA when I was 7 years old. That's why I look so young. So when I did my program in early 2000s, here's how I chose it. I looked at the program's cost. So that program was cheaper. And it was close to my home. And I had a friend who went to that school, and he really liked it. And therefore, I knew that if I go to this school, I will really like it too. Right? There's an assumption there that I made that I'm just like my friend, but we're not talking about critical reasoning anymore. We talk about selecting a school. So based on my experience, I would like to share with you, and obviously experience working in this industry for many years, I'd like to share with you how actually we recommend that you choose the school. And by the way, a lot of this comes from people I work with that I consider much smarter than me that actually used to work on the inside in the admissions offices at top business schools. So here's what you got to remember. This is a program that is going to help you in your career. That's why you're going to do it. It's an investment in your career, just like this class is an investment in your career, just like the GMAT course is an investment in your career. It's not just a write-off that you're going to do this and forget. It is an investment. You are learning some very valuable skills. So if you want to understand if an MBA program is going to help you learn these skills, you got to look at some of the prior history or career paths of past graduates. Just like when you're choosing a GMAT course, you can say, oh, an Admin Master course has a lot of amazing reviews on Google. A lot of people are getting 700 plus scores. So probably if I go to this program, I have a very good chance of getting that score as well. Right? That's what you can do with a MBA program too. So look at the reputation, look at rankings. Obviously look at where the program is, especially if you're going to do this in person. Now, of course, if you're located in one of the cities where we offer programs, you probably can take it in person. If not, you can take it online. That's why if you're somewhere where MBA is not available, you could do an online MBA as long as it's from a reputable university, or you can just simply travel there, make it fun. Look at the structure of the program, how long is it, how many weeks, how many years, how many months, how much does it cost, compare that certainly. Who's going to be in class? For example, when you come into, again, I'm using this parallel because really a GMAT course is your first MBA course. You can think about it that way. And actually, it's something I heard from the GMAT, the people who create the test, and that is something they heard from business schools. So they consider your GMAT course as the first MBA course that prepares you to do well in program. That's why they really like people with high GMAT scores. So who's going to be in your class? We interview everybody who's coming to our class because we want to make sure that people you work with are going to be very well motivated. The same thing with an MBA program. Who else is going to be in class? What is that selection process? How strong is the alumni network? Would you be able to tap that alumni network? And really think long term. Don't think of this as just a quick investment. You're going to learn something valuable. Again, drawing parallels with our program, we're going to teach you skills you can use for the rest of your life, like how to manage your time well, how to make decisions with incomplete information. That's really valuable. That's what's absolutely going to help you on the GMAT. Now, of course, we're going to teach you the strategies, don't worry. If you are applying to business schools in Canada, just like I mentioned, go to this link, canmba.admitmaster.com, or go to admitmaster.com/events. You're going to find that link. Of course, we'll send you an email with this link. That's going to be on Thursday. Just sign up. And if there are any questions you'd like us to answer to the schools, you can absolutely send them to us and we'll address them during this program. So hopefully this was helpful how you choose the school. Now, how does the school choose you? Well, very simply, Going to the school's website is not necessarily going to help, because you're going to find information how to apply, not necessarily how to get in. And if you ask the school, how do I get in? The school will tell you it's a holistic process. Just be yourself. Just tell us who you are. Just send us your resume. We are going to assess it, and we will help you decide if you are the right fit. Well, I think that's giving up a little bit of control. So we need to understand how the process looks like. Well, it is very similar to getting a job. This is a professional degree. So at first, your application is going to be screened, and a short list of candidates is going to be interviewed. Now, it depends on the school, of course, but in some very competitive schools, usually about 20 to 30% of people who apply would then get interviewed. And then of everybody who gets interviewed, a certain number of people are going to be rejected, and then there'll still be a fairly large number of people that remain. And all of these people, the school is trying to create a really amazing dinner party, essentially. It's trying to put people in groups and in batches, and it's trying to create a really amazing experience for you. That is why you cannot choose your own teams at the beginning of your program, because the school is going to choose the team that is going to be very helpful for your learning. So that's how the selection process looks like. So when you are applying, you got to focus on a few things that the school is going to be looking for. And you also have to tell the school how you're different, how you're unique, how you're going to contribute to others, because that's absolutely what goes into the decision process. Don't just focus on yourself, focus on what you're going to contribute to. Now, when you focus on yourself, there are a few important things to remember. Of course, your academics, your life experience, and your potential, they all go into this metrics of how the decisions are made. Of course, in your academics, your GPA, where do you go to school, what courses you took, as well as your GMAT is going to be evaluated. Some of these are already perhaps outside of your control. Some of them are still within your control, the GMAT. So focus on what's within your control. Talk about your life experience. What did you do for work? Did you have any career growth? Did you do any volunteer work? Did you travel a lot? Did you do any community involvement? That is absolutely going to help present your profile. Remember, you need to talk about what is so special and unique about you. If you're just like everybody else, then this is more of a random draw. That's not how the schools choose candidates. And of course, talk about the potential. The school wants you to succeed because the school's rankings depend on your success. So they're going to interview you. They're going to assess what's your potential to be a leader, and what is the chance that you're actually going to find a job in the industry you're talking about. So it's really important that the way you position your application is that that story is realistic, it's believable, and of course, it's relatively ambitious. We do a lot of admissions counseling for both our GMAT clients and for people who come to us just for counseling. We see a lot of stories that are so unrealistic. And as somebody who really has a potential to get somewhere, but just the way they present this story is just so unrealistic that it's hard for the school to believe that this person is going to succeed. Now, this person absolutely can succeed, but if you want to say, I want to found a new Microsoft and become a multi-billionaire by the age of 30, you have a real chance of succeeding, but it's hard to believe that. So be careful about how you tell a story. And then what you actually do in a school, that's absolutely up to you. It's okay to have an open mind, but you need to have a story. And we can certainly help you with that story if you choose to work with us. Now, finally, when should you apply? You've probably heard of multiple rounds in different schools, and the rule of thumb generally is the earlier you apply, the better. If you can apply in August for the start date of next September, that gives you the best chance. However, this year, because of the COVID pandemic, some of the rules of the games have changed. And it might still be possible for you to get into a program this September. In fact, many schools are going to be quite flexible on the GMAT. Even Stanford, which is the most competitive school in the world, has extended the deadline for the GMAT until August 1st. So you still have time, and you can take this exam at home, as you already know by now. So maybe don't discount that. If you really are thinking of, maybe if you've especially been unfortunately laid off from job, or if you're thinking that starting now is a good idea, then reach out to us and we can help you build that plan to get there. And by the way, if you if you go on our website, you'll find a form where you can fill out that one-on-one application form, a one-on-one consultation form, and we can certainly reach out to you and look at your resume as well. If you are thinking of potentially applying this year or next year, and if it doesn't really matter to you, then applying next year will be probably a little less stressful, but do keep in mind that applications next year are going to be significantly up. In fact, applications this year are already up. And you might still have a little bit of an advantage if you're a domestic student, if you don't require a student visa this year. But just to let you know, the schools do see a surge of applications right now because of the COVID pandemic. Many people are deciding and going back to school to upgrade the skills. As we are facing a possible recession right now, it's probably something that's going to help them weather this storm. Next year, it's probably going to be worse. So again, plan this properly. So finally, when is the best time to prepare for the GMAT? It takes approximately 3 to 4 months for most people to prepare for the GMAT. So the best time to prepare is when you have time. We've heard this a lot from many of our clients. They're saying, I'm saving 10 hours a week on my commute time. So why don't I put these 10 hours to now prepare for the GMAT? I never thought I would have time to prepare for the GMAT. All of a sudden, I have all this time. So wouldn't now be a good time to get started? It's really important that you get started as soon as possible if you're thinking of doing your MBA soon, because the GMAT is the longest part of that process. You want this to be out of your way. You don't want to be stressed out, staring down that deadline and saying, what do? I still have 100 points to go and I have 2 weeks before the deadline. You don't want to be in that situation. You might be really stressed out, and that's a sure way to not do well on a test. So plan ahead. And right now, if you're still looking at 2020 applications, I would say you have approximately 3 months to do well on the GMAT. That should be enough until about the end of July for the majority of the schools to do well. Again, if you are applying to Canadian schools, come on Thursday and actually ask them, and we are certainly going to ask them what they do in terms of the deadlines, what kind of flexibility they offer right now. And then come and take our classes. You can join from as early as May 5th, and we can help you get there by that deadline. So that's it from me, ladies and gentlemen. I would now like to take some questions. I know there were a couple of questions in a Q&A box. So somebody was asking why C is wrong. Well, what question was that? Why C is wrong? So we can certainly address that question. But if there are any other questions that you have, please put them in the chat box, or please put them in the Q&A box, and I'll be happy to address them right now. I know the time is 9 o'clock, so we said that we're going to finish by this time, but I'm happy to stay behind just in case there's anything else that you would like to discuss. And again, if there are any questions, just please put them in the chat box, or please put them in a Q&A box. We're going to see them right away, and I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, a couple of people were asking questions already that Tatiana was answering them already. There was a question about what's the difference between GRE and the GMAT. Does these rules also apply to the GRE? So the GRE question or the GRE exam is an exam that evaluates your general studying skills. It is an exam that was primarily designed for master's programs. Many of the MBA schools do accept the GRE as a substitute of the GMAT. However, if you are thinking of getting a job with any of the competitive industries such as consulting or investment banking, the GMAT is preferred. The business schools do very strongly prefer the GMAT. If you do send a GRE, there probably needs to be a reason why it's a GRE. You might get asked that question at the interview, and the answer is the GRE just was easier. It's probably not going to be a good explanation. Now, by the way, I do hear this a lot, that some people think the GRE is easier. When it comes to standardized tests, there is actually no such thing as this is an easier exam. Just because if the exam is easier, it would be easier for everyone, and then everybody would be doing well, and it's still a competitive exam. So at the end of the day, if you have certain skills, for example, GRE requires a lot more memorization, a little less critical thinking, a lot more really just pure calculations. So if you, some people are saying the math is easier on the GRE. I actually disagree. It's not easier. The math concepts are about the same on the GRE, but GRE requires you to do math very often, whereas the GMAT, many questions on the GMAT could be solved without actually doing a lot of math. So it's a lot more about critical thinking. That's what really the business school is all about. So if you have a chance to do the GMAT, do the GMAT. But if you already have a GRE, then of course you could use that GRE score as long as the school accepts it. The GMAT score expires after 5 years. If you do the exam right now, whether an online or an in-person exam, you can use your results for 5 years from the day that you do your test. Somebody was also asking, is the argument and RC section different on the GMAT versus the LSAT? The structure of the test is different because the LSAT is not an adaptive test. Everybody is doing exactly the same question. Also, the LSAT has a greater variety of different types of questions you're going to see. The GMAT will have a smaller number of such questions. There are more types of these questions on the LSAT. For example, an average passage on the LSAT will contain 6 to 7 questions. An average passage on the GMAT will contain only 3 to 4 questions. And on the LSAT, there are 50 critical reasoning questions that are actually called logical reasoning. And on the GMAT, there are only about 8 to 10. Okay, somebody was asking if the bachelor's GPA is less than 3.0, how likely it is to get selected with a high GMAT score for MBA? How important is GPA? Is it worth to apply for MBA when you know your GPA is not high enough? Would the GMAT still help? What is the ideal GMAT score? Now, I don't really know what school you're thinking of applying to, but definitely if you're trying to assess your candidacy, take a look at not just the GMAT, but also the rest of the profile of different people who were accepted into that program. So if the average GPA at that program, let's say 3.6, and your GPA is 3.0, then you are significantly below average. That's why your GMAT probably has to be significantly above average. The GMAT and the GPA come from the same academic bucket. And the longer time that passed after you graduated, the less important is your GPA. So if you've been out of school for 10 years, your GPA is probably less important than if you've been out of school for only 2 years. Generally, for the majority of the school, a 3.0 is going to be an acceptable GPA. Anything below that is going to be a GPA that's a little frowned upon. However, we have had people with a GPA in the low 2s on a 4-point scale. So I know one of our clients had a GPA of 2.0, got to a very competitive master's program that typically is a little more academically rigorous. We had another client with a 2.2 that got into a school that was ranked #1 in the world with a 2.2 GPA and the GMAT score of 760 and a very good application, very good story. So the GPA is probably going to be less important compared to other parts of your application. The most important part of the academic requirements is still the GMAT, and the most important part of the whole application is the story you're going to tell. How competitive is that overall story? So hopefully that answers your question. If there are any other questions, let me know. Somebody was asking with the earthquake question, why C strengthened it more than B? Well, you probably remember that B is actually not strengthened at all. It just simply mentions there was an earthquake in that year. We already know that from the argument. So it does not strengthen it at all. It doesn't strengthen it less. It does not strengthen it, period. Whereas coins do strengthen it because they do tell us that something really big happened that year. What is a live online GMAT course? Somebody was asking. Well, the live online course is a course that is taught live. So you actually see a live instructor, just like you see an instructor right now. The instructor is using visual aids. You actually see an instructor. You're able to communicate with the instructor, not just in a chat box, but with voice. So you can unmute yourself at any point. You can use a webcam if you'd like. You can show your notes to the instructor. The instructor is teaching a class in our classroom with a whiteboard, with all of the visual aids that we normally use in class, but you're just watching through a computer screen. So that's what's a live online GMAT class. You do need to show up at a certain specific time for this class. Like I mentioned, that the evening or a weekend class, and you are able to repeat these classes, live online classes, completely free. You are going to get recordings, but you're able to repeat them completely free. For right now, we're projecting until the end of 2021. So that's the time period that we give you to repeat the classes. Hopefully the pandemic is going to end much earlier than that, but we're giving you that extension, as well as if you are located in some of the cities where we offer live classes. So primarily it's Toronto, Montreal, Chicago, Vancouver, New York, then you are able to come and take our classes in person. So that's a live online class. And what I mentioned, the $20 seminar, that's a seminar with our guest speakers. So they don't really work for us. We invite them. And that is going to be that seminar, Creating Emotional Connections. It is just an amazing seminar. You're going to find the link on our website. And for that specific seminar, we've agreed with that speaker that if you, at the end of the seminar, you don't feel that it was worth it, then we'll refund your money. But nobody ever asked for money. It was just, we got some amazing feedback. We've already done a few of these seminars. They're really amazing because the kind of skills you are learning is just something you are not going to read in a book or even learn in school. It's about how your brain works, how your brain processes information. We've done a seminar last week about how you could use how you can better understand the question, how you can better understand how your brain works to retain information more. So it was about turning your brain for learning. It was about how to cure dyslexia and kind of things like that. It really is just some amazing stuff. And before that, we've done a seminar about how to clear negative emotions, literally in like if you have a lot of anxiety about the test, in 2 minutes, you can clear it all out, even like less, in half a minute, you can get rid of your anxiety on a test and nobody is going to notice. So these are just amazing things. And we're gonna talk about some even more powerful things next Thursday. Somebody was asking, can you ask questions directly to university admissions panelists on April 30th regarding individual profiles or situation? So that is something that they will address in front of everyone. So if you have individual questions, then absolutely we can ask them. However, everybody else who is going to be on that panel is going to hear. So if you'd like to connect with them privately, we are going to be sharing their contact information with you at the end of the panel, so you can reach out to them directly. But certainly asking a question, for example, I have a certain profile, I would really love to connect with you. That will tell them you're very serious, so it's actually a very good thing. And then they will be glad to connect with you afterwards. So that's what I would recommend. Instead of getting very deep into discussion of your own personal profile, ask maybe a question that would be interesting to everybody else in that panel, and then suggest that they connect with you afterwards. All right. So the question was, will we get the books to practice? If you take our class, we are going to give you all of the books that you need. So everything that you're going to require is absolutely going to be included. Let me just go back really quickly when I showed you the breakdown about the kinds of classes that we offer. So if you have already studied somewhere and you're really on a budget, then we're offering that access to the platform for practice. So this is an adaptive practice platform where you're going to be measuring your performance. You're going to be getting analysis of exactly what you need to focus on. There's a fairly big knowledge base. So if you are studying yourself, if you're already taking a class somewhere else, that's what a lot of our clients would do who would get access to this. Now, the on-demand and the live training, both of these are just different ways of taking our GMAT mastery program. The practice only is you're getting access to just a small part of that program. Whereas the on-demand and live training, you're getting all the books, you're still getting access to that practice platform, you're getting access to private tutoring, we have office hours, study groups, and of course, you are able to repeat classes and everything else. So you can think of this as these last two columns include everything you need to prepare for the GMAT except for your time. You need to allocate time to study, but we are going to be here for you. So this is what we do. Many of us work in this industry full time. So if you have any questions, if you need any help, you can always reach out to us. The practice only does not include books. That's just for you to practice. So that's usually if you, again, maybe work with an external tutor, that is going to be a platform you can use. With both of our classes on the right, you get both the books and you're going to get online practice resources as well. A couple more questions here in the Q&A box. Due to the pandemic, is it possible to apply for MBA without the GMAT and write the GMAT test later? So that is definitely a question we are going to address on Thursday. And now I can tell you that the answer is yes. Different schools are going to have different timelines, but every school right now would let you apply without the GMAT. Even some of the most competitive schools in the world are going to accept that. Even Stanford, who usually does not really change its admissions requirements at all, is still going to let you apply now without the GMAT. Now, somebody was asking also if you are taking our program, will we ship you the books? Yes, absolutely, we do ship the books. Now, if you are located in North America, anywhere in Canada or the United States, we are going to ship the books to the US or to Canada. If you are located outside, or right now, for example, in our classes, we have people from Europe, from Asia, from the Philippines, from Africa. We do not ship books outside of North America. However, we will provide you with electronic versions of these books, both our book as well as the official resources. So you are not going to miss on any of the resources. If you are outside of North America, you're not going to get paper copies. If you are in North America, you will get actual paper copies. We like to kill trees. Unfortunately, here in Canada, we get lots of trees, so our pulp industry is doing quite well, and we need to prop our economy. I'm just joking, of course. Okay, so somebody is asking, what happens if your GMAT score is not enough when you are applying? Well, right now, the GMAT online exam is available only once. So if you do that exam and you're not well prepared, unfortunately, you probably are not going to gain acceptance. What the school is then going to do is give you an offer to apply next year, or perhaps transfer your application to next year. So if it's really important for you to apply this year, then be well prepared. We certainly all hope that the test centers are going to be reopened. Right now, the plan is to reopen them in the middle of June. And if everything goes well, then we might see that. It's hard to predict right now. It may also be different from state to state and from province to province, from country to country. But as of right now, that is the plan. So be well prepared, do it once. Even with a test center appointment, you have to wait 16 days to retake your test. And that cuts it really short to the deadlines. If you have any other questions, please let me know. Otherwise, please go to admitmaster.com/offer, get in touch with us. We are going to send you an email tomorrow morning with the links to all of these resources. We would really like to invite you to stay in touch with us. We share a lot of tips and a lot of tricks. We invite lots of good speakers to talk to our students. We do lots of additional things, like, for example, if we're going to be doing a seminar next week where we're going to be sharing with some of our students who are now in a class. We'll invite some of our former students who've already gone through the application process, and some of them have taken recently an online exam, and they're going to share their experience with some of our incoming students. So we are here with you all the way. We are going to be your network and really your support network. You're going to have a really good family of people who are very well committed. We're going to have lots of fun in class. You're going to learn lots of amazing skills, and you're really going to start feeling like you are already halfway in your MBA. And you are, because as long as you follow the program, and as long as you do your homework and do well on your test, you're probably going to get into the school of your dreams, and we can certainly guide you through that process as well. Any other questions? Okay, somebody was asking again about the LSAT. Well, again, if you've already been preparing for the LSAT, certainly some of these question types are interchangeable. So it's certainly going to help you, but the GMAT is still a different exam. It does use a slightly different language compared to the LSAT, so you do need to practice on the GMAT too, but certainly a lot of skills are going to be transferable. If you've already been studying for the LSAT, you could use these skills. If you haven't been studying yet, then there are enough of the GMAT resources to prepare for the GMAT. It's very rare for somebody to seek resources outside of what's available. In fact, we give you so many resources that we give you over 7,000 practice questions. So it's unlikely you're going to need anything, but certainly if you would, then some of the LSAT resources for RC and LR might help you prepare even better for the verbal section. Okay, great. Well, again, it's been awesome seeing you. We certainly hope to see you this Thursday if you are applying to Canadian schools. We are going to be doing some additional seminars also with schools from other parts of the world. We are scheduling these seminars usually a couple of weeks in advance. So as long as you stay on our mailing list, we're certainly going to let you know. Some of the seminars we are doing are exclusive to our clients. So if you are in our program, you're going to get access to some additional seminars, like I've mentioned, and some additional guest speakers, some of the more intimate discussions. We do invite very often representatives from top business schools to talk to our students, connect maybe on a more personal level, because we would like for this journey and this transition to be a seamless transition into the top schools. So we work with a lot of top schools in both in Canada and Europe and the United States. So certainly if you need an introduction at some point, we can certainly introduce you as well. But the GMAT is the first step. So make sure that you start allocating some time to the GMAT. It is something that might potentially take 2 to 3 months. So it's good to start investing this time right now. Now, thank you so much again, and we look forward to seeing you soon.